the bridges could tell of the life they'd seen, I should think we'd be eager to listen.
It felt like, even back then, it felt like a historic bridge.
It's a moment that I shall remember the rest of my life.
People obviously have a soft spot in their hearts for that hard old bridge.
It's been known by many names: the Walnut Street Bridge, the Singing Bridge, Old Shaky, and the People's Bridge.
For years, it's been the link between the East and the West Shores. Thousands have enjoyed it during the Capona festivities, 4th of July celebrations, or just during the lunchtime hour. Seems odd we won't be walking across it now for some time to come. And while its future is uncertain, its history is not. Hello, I'm Amy Castelli.
And I'm Steve Bunnell. For the next half hour, we'll visit a legacy that spans a century and crosses over every facet of life along the Susquehanna.
And look through the Susquehanna River Valley, and when they look at the notches in the mountains that the river cuts, they are prepared to call it one of the most beautiful settings in North America.
It was a time when America's eyes turned to the vast frontiers beyond the Appalachian Mountains. Americans looked westward with a view of hope and bold imagination, driven by the engines of the Industrial Revolution and brought together at nature's boundaries.
There are mules in Cumberland County on the west shore, and on the east shore you have hotels and urban sophistication. It's a difference that you see on all your maps well into the 20th century. And you'll see that canals, roads, railroads, all of them come to a kind of Gordian transportation knot here in Harrisburg, because that's the way to get across to the west. And it all happens at Harrisburg, and it all happens on these bridges.
Harrisburg has long been a city of bridges. In 1820, pioneer covered bridge builder Theodore Burr put the finishing touches on the last of 5 crossings he hammered over the Susquehanna River in as many years. Because Burr's latest bridge at Market Street in Harrisburg was arched between the piers, it became known as the Camelback Bridge. It began its long, storied career creating memorable experiences for those who dared to venture across.
We crossed the Susquehanna River by a wooden bridge, roofed and covered in on all sides, and nearly a mile in length. It was profoundly dark, perplexed with great beams, crossing and recrossing at every angle. And through the broad chinks and crevices in the floor, the rapid river gleamed far down below like a legion of eyes. Charles Dickens.
From inside, the Camelback was noisy, dark, and seemingly endless. But from a distance, it caught the imagination of those who took time to enjoy and capture the view.
The great lithographs of the city that are made in the 19th and 20th century always focus on the river. They focus on the bridges.
Builders of the time used virtually every material available to them, and bridges constructed with combinations of stone and iron were common. But another choice was widely used and had a built-in hazard.
Wooden bridges, when they get too hot, burn.
And burn they did. In 1841, spectators lined the riverbank to watch the Cumberland Valley Railroad Bridge collapse in a nearly mile-long pile of ashes. They came back to watch the east span of the Camelback surrender to flames a quarter-century later. By that time, the Pennsylvania Railroad held tremendous sway in state politics and dominated the railroad industry. It was no surprise then that Pennsylvania bitterly opposed the construction of another cross-state railroad. It was becoming reality. Stonemasons were busy carving out tunnels in the western part of the state and erecting bridge piers in the Susquehanna River at Harrisburg for a new railroad supported by a group of investors that included millionaires with names like Vanderbilt, Rockefeller, and Carnegie. Their substantial clout was backing the feverish construction, and in 1885, the new piers stood ready for steel just south of the Camelback as the route neared completion. But another millionaire named J.P. Morgan intervened and persuaded both railroads to strike a deal. The work stopped. Much of the route became the Pennsylvania Turnpike years later, and several of the abandoned bridge piers remain standing in the river south of City Island. But competition was also stirring for the Camelback Bridge, which in the 1880s remained the only pedestrian crossing. That monopoly drove up the tolls, and the inevitable forces of competition would soon put a new pressure on the Camelback in the form of a bridge its builders hoped would truly be a bridge for the people.
When we come back, the People's Bridge comes off the drawing board and onto its foundation.
We'll tell you about one man's vision and the creation of a landmark.
One, two, three, four.
By the middle of the 19th century, the state legislature had moved into its new building on the site of the present-day Capitol. Harrisburg was growing, and between 1860 and 1870 doubled in size. Just north of the city at Camp Curtin, troops prepared for action at Gettysburg, Bull Run, and Antietam. Downtown, preparations were made to burn down the Camelback Bridge, lest Robert E. Lee's Confederate Army cross it into the state capitol. The rebels never made it, the bridge survived, and Harrisburg moved on. A new opera house opened in 1873, and 3 years later, Harrisburgers celebrated the nation's centennial. 9 years after that, they celebrated their own. But for as much as Harrisburg prospered, every man, woman, and child, every pig, cow, goat, and wagon had only one way to cross the Susquehanna River other than rail or ferry. It was the Camelback Bridge. The Camelback was owned by the Harrisburg Bridge Company, which, keenly aware of the monopoly it held, set high fares for crossing. Some outside investors came up with a plan to buy the bridge, tear it down, build a new one, and lower the rates. But the group's leader received a less than cooperative reply from the Harrisburg Bridge Company.
The president made light of our efforts and remarked that young Wallower might as well try to build a bridge to the moon. Naturally, this did not have the effect desired of lessening my intention. E.Z. Wallower.
By the time he was 24 years old, Elias Zollinger Wallower had established his own newspaper in Harrisburg. For years, he attacked the Harrisburg Bridge Company's stranglehold on river crossing. In 1889, he turned his words to action.
And so he said, well, if you won't sell it, I'll build one. And they said, oh, poo-poo. But he was determined that the farmers would not have to pay so much to bring their produce over. Only the Lebanon County farmers could bring things into Harrisburg. They couldn't come across the river because it cost so much. Imagine 90 cents for a round trip. That's a terrible amount of money.
Wallower secured $200,000 from investors on both shores and, using his populist theme, called the new group the People's Bridge Company. That year, the Harrisburg Bridge Company watched in outrage as piers rose out of the river at Walnut Street, a block from their own bridge. They quickly filed legal action, charging the new piers would obstruct rafts on the river. It was overruled, and the People's Bridge Company retaliated by hiring engineering consultants to ruin Camelback's reputation.
Their report was probably the most unique ever rendered by experts, that the Camelback remained in position by the force of habit and the grace of God. E.Z. Wallower.
As construction of the People's Bridge continued, heavy rain soaked Pennsylvania. The same flood that killed thousands in Johnstown prompted the builders to raise the bridge piers an additional 6 feet.
Well, let's put it this way. If they wouldn't have raised it 6 feet, the bridge probably would not have been here in 1996. Because we're concerned about it now because it still is in the floodplain. And being 6 foot lower with the water levels that you usually experience in the Harrisburg area, any debris that would have gotten behind that or even the force of the water itself probably would have lifted the bridge off many years ago.
By the spring of 1890, the project was completed. And someone made notes as history took place. It simply read,
Wormleysburg, April 26. Mr. John Probst was the first foot passenger to pay toll on the People's Bridge on Saturday morning at 5 minutes past 1 o'clock.
From the beginning, the People's Bridge was a success, and the forces of competition set in.
They had a toll war, and finally, the Harrisburg Bridge Company brought their toll down to 5 cents.
The two bridges coexisted for over a decade until floodwaters knocked out 2 spans of the Camelback Bridge. Work crews dismantled the rest, and the storied wooden bridge at Market Street was no more.
When the People's Bridge returns, we'll visit baseball, the beach, and the lazy days of summer.
And we'll tell you of an old way to roll onto City Island.
Shortly after the new century turned, workmen put the finishing touches on a record-breaking project north of Harrisburg. The railroad bridge at Rockville became the longest stone arch crossing in the world. Back in the city on a rainy day in 1904, President Theodore Roosevelt stood on the steps of the new state Capitol building for its dedication. 5 blocks away, the wooden planks of the People's Bridge rumbled with the day-to-day goings-on.
At that time, probably all horse and buggy, or horse and wagon, or pedestrians. And we had to stop at the toll booth, and my granddad paid toll, and if he had any extra passengers, he'd try to hide them in the back of the wagon, so we'd have to pay for it.
Buggies shared the bridge with a versatile version of the iron horse. Trolleys rolled into most towns on the east and west shores, providing essential transportation for years.
My parents took myself and my oldest brother. I might have been between 4 and 5, and he might have been 3. We would take the trolley car from Steelton, where we lived, and we'd go to Market Square, get off the trolley, and I can remember walking across the Walnut St Bridge to go to the beach to swim.
City Island is the scene of great football games and great baseball games, and the water plant, it's a wonderful meeting place between the West Shore and the East Shore. All these people sort of celebrating the summertime around the bridges and around City Island, people in their strange 20s and 30s style swimsuits. A lot of really quite sweet memories of everything the bridges and the island and the river meant to people at that particular time.
It couldn't be better located. In the middle of the Susquehanna River, City Island has been a popular recreation spot for as many years as there's been a People's Bridge. The national pastime thrived at the Harrisburg Athletic Club's field, while another part of the island literally came to life. These rare lantern slides show gardens lovingly tended during the summer months. It was the place to be, the games, the gardens, and long days splashing about in the cool waters of the Susquehanna. And it all took place in the shadow of the People's Bridge.
Harrisburg has what arguably is the most scenic waterfront in the nation for an inland city, and the Walnut St Bridge is a pivotal part of that. When you think of the Harrisburg waterfront, even people that come from thousands of miles away, they remember the bridge. They remember the island, they remember the bridge. It is an almost inseparable connection between the two.
Since its beginning, the bridge's towering iron frame and long spans have dominated the riverfront and demonstrate an interesting blend of aesthetics and architecture. Its design comes from a method that was patented and manufactured by the Phoenix Bridge Company. The posts are actually made from rolled pieces of iron riveted together, creating a strong, hollow truss.
And they're able to basically hold everything together by just having a hollow section sitting over those connections. And to me, that's the historical part of the bridge.
The weight of trolley cars pushed the bridge to its limits, but by World War II, rails gave way to rubber. The years following the war brought prosperity, more traffic, and in 1950, a new deck. Its metal grating gave rise to a nickname that would last for decades, the Singing Bridge.
As soon as your car tires hit it, it would start to hum. And the pitch would vary with the speed of your vehicle, of course. Then every couple of 100 feet, you'd hit a ka-chunk, which was the joint that held the sections together.
But the bridge could do more than belt out a tune.
It does shake. There's a little part when you leave the entryway from Front Street, about a quarter way in, and I had a certain spot I would stop, and I would just stand there on the railing and just feel it shaking. So when they call it Old Shaky, it shakes.
On June 5th, 1972, Old Shaky was entered into the National Register of Historic Places. Just days later, historic floodwaters brought what many thought would be the end of the People's Bridge.
Still to come, we'll show you some of the most dramatic pictures of the Walnut Street Bridge collapse.
And we'll have a first-hand account of the last people to cross those collapsed spans.
By 1972, most traffic was buzzing by on the Interstate, Market Street, and Harvey Taylor bridges. Still, the People's Bridge caught the attention of those who enjoyed the ride.
We used to go to Camp Hill across that bridge, and we had relatives on both sides of the river, so we would routinely go over there. And what struck me at the time was just that it felt like, even back then, it felt like a historic bridge, and you felt like you were really it was part of what made Harrisburg memorable as a place to live in.
Despite the bridge's nostalgic lore, engineers were turning an increasingly skeptical eye on its ability to safely carry cars. Studies had recommended further reducing loads or closing the bridge altogether. Then in June, Hurricane Agnes slammed into Pennsylvania, creating the largest natural disaster the state has ever seen. Thousands fled rising floodwaters. The bridge was left to face the current.
One of the networks, in fact, positioned cameras on what is now Swenson Plaza at North Front and Walnut Streets, waiting for the bridge to go down.
More pressures against the wrought iron itself, the truss itself, and I guess it had used one of its 9 lives because it made it through that one.
The bridge held, but in the aftermath, more studies determined that traffic would cross no more. And by the mid-1970s, it truly became a people's bridge. Through the 80s and on into the 90s, the Walnut Street Bridge gained in popularity as an important part of summer celebrations at the riverfront. In the winter, it provided a front-row view for a periodic bout with Mother Nature. The curious gathered on the bridge deck to watch an ice jam break loose in January 1994. It was a preview to another dramatic showdown just 2 years later.
We got almost 2.5 inches of rain in 3 hours. Real warm weather, like somewhere between 40 and 55 degrees with high winds as high as 50 miles an hour, driving that heat into the snowbank and causing it to just literally turn to slush. You know, in your wildest dreams, you couldn't put all these combinations together. And then on top of that, we had real thick ice on the river. They were starting to revise their forecasts from like 17 feet in Harrisburg to like 26 feet.
It was the fastest rise ever recorded in the history of the Susquehanna River.
And this water starts coming up and that ice starts breaking and it all goes down and jams together and gets caught in bridges.
The flow hit hard at Walnut Street.
You could hear the ice cracking and you could hear the metal starting to give way. That's about the same time that Tina King was at the end of the bridge waving her arms.
All of a sudden it was forming a huge S. You could literally see a bow forming, and when you looked up, all of a sudden there were these 5 people standing in the middle of this bow.
We heard a popping noise behind us, and we looked around, and the guardrails were separating. Bolts flew off.
And at that point, it's like, gentlemen, pick up the pace, we have to get off this bridge.
And no sooner we got onto the island, it let go.
Yeah, I'd say another 70 to 90 seconds, and it could have been all over for all of us.
God was with us, and kept us safe, had his angels around us.
As the sun rose on January 21st, the scope of the damage was clear to see.
All along the river valley, the task of cleanup would begin. Spring plans for City Island were temporarily derailed, but the island would reopen in time for baseball. Once again, though, the future of the Walnut Street Bridge dangles in the balance. To the naked eye, it looks like the bridge needs 3 new spans to make it whole again. But underwater, questions lurk about the integrity of some of the piers. Still, there has been a groundswell of support to save the bridge, and a fund has been set up to make it happen. For many of us, the People's Bridge stirs up fond memories, but perhaps the reason for its popularity runs deeper. It has been an enduring landmark, a steady survivor of changing times. In 1972 and this year, it is the symbol of recovery from the ravages of floodwaters.
Its future now lies largely in the hands of its owner, the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation. It will continue to perform a battery of engineering tests on the bridge and eventually decide its fate.
Many are calling for a complete restoration. Some think parts of the bridge will remain with the newly designed spans, and others think the bridge will be replaced entirely.
Whatever happens, we'll still have the physical structure of Old Shaky around for some time yet. But what's more enduring are the countless memories of a working piece of history that earned it the name the People's Bridge.
Because your comments are important to us, we invite you to phone at 238-2100 or email us at whp099a@prodigy.com. A fund has been set up to restore the People's Bridge. Checks can be made payable to the Harrisburg Walnut Street Bridge Trust, Dauphin Deposit Bank, care of J.A. Macri, P.O. Box 2961, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania.